Hi guys, today we'll delve into the case of a mother who vanished from her home under strange circumstances. Police launched an investigation and uncovered unexpected and even bizarre clues. They eventually pieced together the truth, leaving even seasoned detectives shocked. This case quickly became one of the most talked about in the country, as its details left everyone outraged. Tara Lynn Grant was born on June 22, 1972, in Michigan. She spent most of her childhood on a farm with her parents and sister. Tara loved being outdoors, riding horses, and helping her parents with other animals on the farm. In school, Tara was very active in sports. She was on the cheerleading and basketball teams, and also played in the school band. After high school, Tara attended the University of Michigan, where she met a guy named Steven. They started dating and got married soon after her graduation. Tara, who earned a business degree, got a job at a large international company. Steven, on the other hand, planned to go into politics. He had been an assistant to a state senator during his time in university. But when the senator retired, Steven was left without a job. So, he started working at a small tool-making shop owned by his father. 4 years after their wedding, the couple had a daughter, and a few years later, a son. After their second child was born, the family bought a new house in a prestigious neighborhood in Macomb County, Michigan, right outside of Detroit. By then, Tara had made significant progress in her career, but it came with its drawbacks. She had to travel a lot for work, often flying to different states and countries, which meant she could only spend weekends at home with her family. Because of this, Steven took on most of the childcare responsibilities. His job at his father's company allowed him a flexible schedule so he could spend more time with the kids, but it was still challenging for him to juggle work and childcare, so they decided to hire a full-time nanny. There is a special program that helps families find a nanny from another country who would live with them full-time and take care of the children. Thanks to her job, Tara could afford to hire such a nanny, and soon they found the right person. They hired a young woman from Germany who quickly got along with their children and took on most of the childcare duties. Steven, who got more free time, also started working part-time as a youth soccer coach. But, despite the family's good financial situation, Tara's constant absence strained her relationship with Steven. She was only home on weekends, and they began arguing more frequently because of it. Tara hoped that after her next promotion, she could adjust her schedule to spend more time at home. But until then, she was away on business trips almost every day. This went on until February 14, 2007, when something unexpected happened. On Valentine's Day, Steven called the police and told them that Tara had been out of touch for 5 days, which was quite unusual. He explained that on the evening of February 9th, Tara returned from a business trip and told him she had to leave a day earlier this time, spending just 1 day with the family. This led to another argument between them, and Tara started packing her suitcase. A few minutes later, Steven heard her talking on the phone, saying, "I'll be waiting at the end of the street," before she left the house and got into some dark-colored car. Since then, Tara hadn't been in touch and didn't answer any of his calls. The police's first question was why Steven waited 5 days before reporting her disappearance. But Steven said he initially didn't see any cause for concern. He thought Tara just went on her business trip early and wasn't answering his calls because of the argument. However, over the next few days, he started to worry because she hadn't been in touch for so long. Normally, when she was away, she'd call the kids, who were only 3 and 7 years old, but not this time. On Monday, Tara's boss called him and said she hadn't shown up for a meeting. This was also very odd and meant she hadn't gone to work. Steven called her relatives and told them what was happening, but they assumed Tara just needed time away from the constant arguments with him. She had told her parents several times that her relationship with Steven was getting more and more problematic because of her job, and they argued quite often. So, her relatives thought she decided to take a break from Steven and would soon come back home. As time went by, Tara still didn't show up and she didn't answer any calls. Eventually, Steven began to worry that something might have happened to her and decided to contact the police. As Steven answered the police's questions, they noticed several suspicious scratches on him. Detectives asked if the argument with his wife had turned physical, but Steven denied it. He claimed that he often works with metal parts at his father's shop and gets scratched by them regularly. After the interview at the station, detectives said they needed to search their home, and Stephen agreed. They arrived and found that all of Tara's belongings, including her documents and purse, were missing along with her suitcase. Stephen also gave them access to Tara's computer, where they examined her bank account. There were no transactions since the day of her disappearance, which seemed odd. If she had gone somewhere, she would have needed to buy plane tickets, book a hotel, and so on. But there were no activities on her account for the past 5 days. During the search of the house, detectives found no clues that could shed light on Tara's disappearance. There was no indication that she could have been the victim of any crime, so they were left trying to trace her movements since February 9th. The local police department had little experience investigating such cases, because the area was considered one of the safest in the country. Most of the time, they dealt with minor neighbor disputes and other nonviolent incidents. They asked Stephen to undergo a polygraph test, but he was outraged by the fact that the police considered his involvement. He said he would never harm his wife and began to cry. The police left his house and began to consider their next steps. But the following morning, Stephen suddenly called them and said he was ready for the interrogation. However, just a few moments later, his lawyer contacted the detectives and told them that he had advised his client against it. The police obviously considered Stephen as the person of interest, as he was Tara's husband. Besides being standard practice in such cases, they simply couldn't find any other leads. Tara's relatives, friends, and colleagues all said they hadn't heard from her since February 9th and had no idea where she could be. There was no activity on her bank account either, although she would have clearly needed to make some purchases. Detectives began to think how they could interrogate Stephen, and quickly found something interesting. His driver's license had been revoked, but he continued to drive his car. So, officers waited for him to get behind the wheel and arrested him. But he once again felt like the police were treating him as a suspect and refused to talk to them. His lawyer quickly bailed him out and Stephen returned home. The police continued to search for clues and requested Tara's mobile phone records. Her last call was made on the day of her disappearance. She called Stephen from the airport and said she would be home soon. After that, she received numerous calls from Stephen, but they all went to voicemail. Detectives listened to these recordings. Stephen repeatedly asked her to answer or call back and accused her of neglecting their children. He also pleaded with her to come home for their sake. The phone itself was turned off, and based on data from the cell phone carrier, the last time it connected to cell towers was in the vicinity of Tara's house on the evening of her disappearance. Interestingly, the police found no incoming calls during that period. And as we recall, Stephen mentioned that someone called Tara before she left the house and said she would be waiting on the street. But, despite this, from Stephen's voicemail recordings, detectives got a feeling that he genuinely worried about his wife and was angry with her for leaving their children. Although they didn't rush to rule him out as a suspect, they couldn't find any new leads either. Stephen still refused to talk to the police, accusing them of wasting time on him instead of searching for Tara. Instead, he actively engaged with the media, which began covering the case from the early days. Tara's mysterious disappearance quickly drew widespread public attention, and Stephen appeared in front of cameras almost every day, pleading for her to come home. When information about the case reached the company through which Stephen and Tara hired the nanny, they decided to send her back to Germany. Before leaving, she gave a statement to the police and spoke positively about her time in their home. She also mentioned that on the evening Tara came home, she was at a bar with friends. When she returned home, she saw Stephen, who seemed upset and told her that Tara had just left the house. Despite Stephen's refusal to cooperate with the police, he hired a private detective, a former FBI agent, who conducted his own investigation, but also failed to find Tara. With no leads on their hands, the police decided to try a different approach. They contacted the company through which Tara and Stephen found the nanny, and here they found something interesting. Before hiring the woman from Germany, they had a total of 6 nannies, but none of them stayed in the job for long. Detectives spoke to them and almost all said that Stephen's behavior seemed not only strange, but also frightening to them. According to their accounts, he rummaged through their belongings, asked intimate questions, and often yelled at them, treating them as if they were supposed to follow his commands. The police then wondered why the last nanny from Germany portrayed her time with the family in a completely different light, with only positive words about Stephen. They secured permission to monitor her emails and phone, leading to an unexpected revelation. Detectives uncovered messages between her and Stephen, revealing they had been having an affair. It emerged that the 19-year-old had been involved in an intimate relationship with him during Tara's business trips, which persisted until she was forced to leave the country. Although this was an important lead for the police, infidelity did not prove Stephen's involvement in Tara's disappearance, so they continued to search for other evidence. Speaking with Tara's relatives and friends, detectives learned that nearly all of them had disliked Stephen since she married him. According to them, he behaved quite strangely, tried to control her every move, and didn't get along with anyone in her family. Investigators soon learned something else. Stephen's former girlfriend, whom he had dated before meeting Tara, called the police and told them something interesting. According to her, Stephen had reached out to her several months prior, and their conversations gradually became more intimate. Eventually, Stephen began openly expressing his desire to engage in a romantic relationship with her, despite both of them being married. Stephen also complained about Tara and her constant absence. According to him, he suspected her of cheating on him with her boss. He even admitted to installing special software on her computer, which he used to read her messages, but found no evidence to confirm his suspicions. All of this made the police even more inclined to consider the husband's possible involvement in Tara's disappearance, but they still needed some evidence. When several weeks had passed since her disappearance, they began to consider the possibility that she might no longer be alive and launched extensive searches for her body. They enlisted volunteers and began searching the area within a radius of several miles from Tara's home, as well as a large park nearby. The search went on for several days, but it yielded no results. This continued until February 28th, when a local resident called the police. The woman came to the same park for a walk, aware of Tara's disappearance and the ongoing search for her body, so she remained vigilant and kept an eye out for anything unusual. Soon enough, she did notice something strange. Under one of the trees along the trail, there was a plastic bag covered with branches and snow. It was clearly filled with something, and the woman decided to take a closer look. Through the bag, she saw rubber gloves and something resembling metal shavings inside, and there was something dark red at the bottom. She decided to take the bag with her and handed it over to the police. Detectives immediately realized that there was likely blood at the bottom of the bag and sent it to the lab. But there was a problem. Experts warned that due to a high workload, DNA analysis could take up to 2 months. Nevertheless, they examined the contents and confirmed that it did indeed seem to be human blood. The police immediately focused their search efforts in the area where the bag was found, deploying all available resources. Stephen did not participate in the search, citing bias from the police. Instead, he gave a lengthy interview to a news channel, making quite a few questionable statements. He repeatedly criticized Tara for being absent from her home most of the time, labeling her a bad mother. Stephen claimed he took on almost all parenting responsibilities and was a better mom than she was. When reporters asked about their financial situation and whether he had been living mostly on Tara's money, Stephen became angry and insisted he didn't need a penny from her. During the interview, Stephen also accused Tara of infidelity without providing any evidence. Throughout the conversation, he repeatedly condemned Tara and emphasized how difficult their marriage had been for him. As Stephen was giving the interview, the detectives made some progress. They had previously tried to obtain a search warrant for Tara's home without success due to insufficient grounds, and Stephen had prevented them from searching it voluntarily. However, after the blood-stained bag was discovered in the park, the judge granted the warrant. The police arrived at the house, and around the same time Stephen returned after the interview, detectives informed him of the warrant to search his home, and Stephen opened the door for them before calling his lawyer. The lawyer inquired if his client was under arrest, and the police answered, no. Stephen then said he would take his dog for a walk, fetched it from the house, and left, while the police began the search. They went through room by room, eventually reaching the garage. The One of the detectives noticed a large green container with several plastic bags inside. Slitting one open, they found an unknown substance, along with what appeared to be women's clothing. Opening another bag, the officer realized with horror that it likely contained human remains. In total, there were 5 bags in the container, and the detectives quickly confirmed that they indeed contained the remains of a woman. The police realized that they had found Tara's body and Stephen must be her murderer. However, Stephen had not returned, so the police immediately began searching for him. They feared he might flee or harm someone else, knowing he was likely going to prison anyway. Meanwhile, officers called in reinforcements for the park search, as only a portion of Tara's remains were found in the garage. Over 100 officers from neighboring districts were dispatched to assist, and their efforts quickly paid off. Several hundred yards from where the bag was discovered, they found another part of the body, and later, they found the head. Due to the cold temperatures, the remains were well preserved, allowing detectives to confirm they belonged to Tara. They found several more body parts, and as night fell, the search was suspended until morning. All this time, detectives also tried to locate Stephen, but to no avail. They reached out to his friends, and one of them revealed that Stephen had called him, informing him about the search at his house, and asked to pick him up from the street. Stephen's friend drove there and took him to his home. On the way, he noticed that Stephen behaved quite strangely. He seemed scared, his hands were shaking, and overall, it felt like Stephen was on the verge of a breakdown. When they arrived at the friend's house, Stephen said he wanted to see his children and asked to borrow the friend's car. At that time, Stephen's children were in another state under the care of his sister. The friend gave him his pickup and Stephen left. The police requested information about his phone and credit cards, allowing them to quickly determine his route. They saw that Stephen withdrew money several times on the way to the neighboring state and called his sister. So, the police realized he was heading to his children and immediately set off in that direction. Then, something unexpected happened. The police received a call from Germany, from the very nanny with whom Stephen had had a romantic relationship. She told them that Stephen had just called her and confessed to killing Tara. According to him, they indeed had an argument that evening and Stephen started yelling at her. Tara then slapped him in the face and he flew into a rage. He pushed her and Tara hit her head after falling on the floor, resulting in her death. The police no longer doubted Stephen's involvement, but they still needed to find him. For several hours, they searched the area along the highway leading to the neighboring state, and soon they discovered Stephen's friend's car. It was abandoned near the entrance to the national park, but Stephen himself was nowhere to be seen. The police headed to the park, and several hours later, thanks to thermal cameras, they finally found him. Stephen was lying under a tree, wearing only light clothing, and the officers realized he was on the brink of death from hypothermia. He was in an altered state, talking to trees and muttering incomprehensible phrases, so they quickly airlifted him to the hospital. Despite the fact that his body temperature dropped to just 88 degrees, doctors managed to save his life, although it took some time for him to fully recover. While he was in the hospital, he was charged with murder, and detectives handed the case over to the court. It's worth mentioning that on the same day, his lawyer refused to defend Stephen. When asked why, he vaguely replied, "I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror in the mornings." Stephen was assigned a new lawyer, and meanwhile, forensic experts examined Tara's remains. One of the most experienced pathologists in the country, who had worked on the JFK and JonBenet Ramsey cases, was appointed as the chief medical examiner. After studying the remains, he concluded that Stephen's version of events did not match reality. Stephen claimed Tara died from a head injury, but the actual cause of death turned out to be strangulation. When Stephen finally regained consciousness, detectives went to see him in the hospital and he told them what really happened that evening. According to him, when Tara came home and said she had to leave a day earlier, they got into an argument and he started yelling at her. When she tried to leave the room, he grabbed her and Tara hit him in the face. Stephen struck back, then strangled her. He dragged her body from the second floor to the garage and placed Tara in the trunk of her car. At the same time, the nanny returned home, and Stephen told her that his wife had just left him. The next morning, he took the body to his father's workshop, making sure no other workers would be there. Stephen destroyed all of Tara's documents and personal belongings, then dismembered her body using a saw. He also mentioned that he vomited twice while doing all this, but he kept telling himself, "If you don't do this, you'll end up in prison for the rest of your days." Several hours later, he packed the remains into plastic bags, placed them in a container, and returned home, leaving the body in the car. For a few days, he'd been thinking how to dispose of the remains while creating an alibi for himself. He repeatedly called Tara and left messages on her voicemail, begging her to come home. One day, he took his children's snow sled and went to the park where the bags with the remains would later be found. He placed the container on the sled to take it away from the crowded areas and started pulling it up a hill. At some point, the rope slipped from his hands and the sled rolled down. The container overturned and the bags with the remains spilled out. Stephen picked them up, put the container back on the sled, and after a while buried the bags under the snow in remote areas before returning home. Several days later, when the police began searching for Tara, detectives announced they were starting a search operation in the park. Stephen panicked. He remembered that one of the bags, the largest one, was hidden quite poorly, so he feared it would be found pretty quickly. So, he walked to the park, took a few bags, slung them over his shoulder, and carried them to his father's workshop, leaving them right on the roof. The day before his interview, he took the container from home, went to the workshop, retrieved the bags, and brought them back to his garage. To his surprise, the next day, the police obtained a search warrant for the house, where they found these bags in the container. After that, Stephen confessed that when his guilt became apparent, he had not planned to surrender alive. However, he couldn't carry out his plan and survived despite almost freezing to death. Throughout the conversation with the police, Stephen showed no signs of remorse. On the contrary, he often smiled and joked, even when describing how he disposed of the body. While Stephen awaited trial in prison, his children continued living with his sister. However, Tara's family wasn't happy with this arrangement. Stephen's sister continued to communicate with him, feeling sorry for him, and even joked about Tara's murder. Eventually, Tara's relatives succeeded in having the children stay with Tara's sister, but Stephen's family still had the right to see them. The trial began in November 2007, and Stephen didn't deny his guilt. Nevertheless, his new lawyer tried to argue for a lighter sentence, explaining that Stephen committed the crime after many years of marital problems caused by his wife's frequent absence. During the trial, it also emerged that Stephen lied about Tara's plans to leave a day earlier. Her boss said Tara had no additional meetings scheduled and was supposed to start her work at the usual time. Tara's sister, who spoke with her shortly before the murder, confirmed this. At that time, Tara told her she would be home all weekend, as usual. There was also no evidence to support the claim that Tara was cheating on her husband. Her boss said their relationship was purely professional, and it was confirmed by their email letters and texts. Even Stephen himself admitted that he didn't actually believe it. The prosecution failed to prove that Stephen had planned the murder in advance. Apparently, he committed the crime in a fit of rage, which could have led to charges of second-degree murder rather than first-degree. On December 21, 2007, the jury unanimously found Stephen guilty, and he was sentenced to a minimum of 50 years in prison. Stephen's lawyer tried to appeal the verdict, but to no avail. Since then, he has been serving his sentence behind bars, but his story doesn't end there. Tara's murder attracted the attention of millions of people across the country, and Stephen clearly enjoyed it. While in prison, he began writing a book and planned to release it with the help of his sister. They even discussed the possibility of a film adaptation, and Stephen pondered which famous actor could play him. In 2008, something else came to light. Stephen's children told their aunt that they actually saw their father killing their mother. On that fateful evening, they came out of their room after hearing screams and witnessed the entire ordeal. When this information appeared in the media, Stephen's relatives accused the children of lying and continued to defend him. Also in the same year, it became known that Stephen's father, who unlike other relatives didn't support him, could not live with what his son had done, and his body was found in his own home. As of now, Stephen remains behind bars, and he will only be eligible for parole in 2058. Every year, Tara's relatives and friends host a marathon along the route in the park where she used to jog frequently, and her children are always among the participants. Despite their father's actions, they have found the strength to move forward and honor their mother's memory. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video.